What's going on, everybody? Hello, hello. Welcome. Welcome to the Keisha King Show. We are doing a different live on tonight than what we normally do. I have my good friend, and guess we're gonna call him my co-host because basically that's what he does. He's been graciously co-hosting with me, and you guys know that I did this video, this discussion. We're gonna call it with Justin Giboney, who is the founder of the AND campaign, and he wrote this book, Don't Let Nobody Turn You Around. And so Chuck and I were talking about it behind the scenes, and he offered some really good feedback. And I was like, I think it would serve the audience well to give this feedback for you to share it with the audience. So that's what he's here to do. And that's what we are going to do tonight. We're going to go over this live. He's going to talk about things that I got wrong, things that Justin got wrong, and just give an honest critique of different parts of the discussion. So without further ado, my good friend, Mr. Teach'em, Chuck Littleton. What's going on, friend?
Oh man, doing well tonight. Happy to be here. Like you said, I watched your interview or conversation, and I had a lot of thoughts and opinions, and I wanted to share them live. And you and I both came to the conclusion that it would be best if we just dedicated a totally separate day to unpacking some of these things. I'm looking forward to it. It was tough. It was tough to get through. I'll be honest. It was tough to get through. But it's funny. I didn't get completely. I didn't reach the end. I had about maybe 10 minutes left. And Justin said something. I forgot what it was. It got to a point toward the end where I just stopped it, and I was like, "All right, I think I've heard enough." I wish I could get all the way to the end and just call it a job well done. But I was just like, you know what? I think I got enough, and I told myself I would finish watching it today, but I didn't get around to it. But I think I've seen enough.
Yeah, I think you got it. Be easy on me. I mean,
no, it's not you. It's not you.
I know. Let me make sure I got everything. Just give me 1 second, just to get this all. Okay. So I just so everybody knows. So the discussion with Justin Giboney and I, it was not going to be a debate. So it wasn't supposed to be where, we're just going back and forth. So it was more like a discussion, and I wanted to honor that. We had about an hour's time so that we didn't have, like our normal streams, like a few hours or so. So there was a lot to get to in a short amount of time. I guess I'm saying this to give myself some to give you to smooth things over for myself, I mean, but that's just the truth. But when I went back myself, I watched it. I'm like, I wish I would have pushed back here and there. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on into it, because I'm sure we'll have a lot to get to.
Yeah.
Me and my faces, y'all don't.
So what? How are you gonna do? You just gonna let it play, Keisha?
I'm just gonna let it play because at first I was like, I'm just gonna let it play, and then you can stop me when you got something to say. All right,
let's roll.
But in as much as it put,
all right, Mr. Justin and campaign and all those Colorado, and they're sorry, y'all. Either I'm God of everything.
Is it playing a little low to you?
Either you believe what I say about you or what the world says about you. And it just really caused me to confront, some things that I was believing as a professing Christian, because I was all right, sorry. I just want to get to him.
Times who even have the largest churches have gone a little farther left than a lot of your everyday churches, the people in the pews and all that. So that is a big difference. But as far as one of the big distinctions between how I see the Black
hold
church
on, Keisha, time out. Pause that. Now, did he just say that a lot of Black churches have gone further left than the people in the pews? Is that what he just said?
Yes. So,
So
mhm.
go ahead.
So I was saying that I think he was kind of agreeing with me. I was saying how we've seen churches go left, and he was just kind of getting started and saying, yes, we have seen churches go further left, the congregants, but I'm sorry, the leaders, but not
Leadership.
necessarily the 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 congregation.
Okay, so the first thing I have a problem with. Okay, so the congregants, I mean, they're in the pews, they're there, they're showing up, they're listening to the pastor or
Mhm.
whoever is there giving a sermon, and he's saying that the leadership is further left than the parishioners. I don't understand that. I don't understand that. See, to me, this is just another example of him attempting to circle the wagons, if you will, around certain topics and certain issues that are unpopular for a lot of
Mhm.
people. And instead of telling the truth about the condition of the so-called Black church, he's more hell-bent on defending it because he has a stake in it for some reason. And I think that as this conversation plays out, we're going to find out why and what that stake is.
Mm.
But those two things don't make sense. You don't show up to a place. You don't spend time and well, not time and resources. Time is a resource, but you don't spend time and monies and tithing and had gas money driving to the church, whatever, to go and listen to someone give a sermon who you're not aligned with,
Right.
uh, theologically, spiritually, etc. Even if the topic of politics is broached inside of a church, uh, I don't understand that. He would, if he is sure of this, if he is confident in this in his assessment, then I would like to hear him explain how such a thing is even possible. That just doesn't make sense to me.
I think he's trying to say, how conservatives will say, like, Black people are pretty conservative, like
They're not.
one on one. I think
They're
that
not.
that's just my
They're not.
estimation.
They're not. I mean, you will get, when you have one-on-one conversations with people, at times you will get more, they tend to grant you more concessions if they're willing to
Hmm.
talk to you sensibly on a one-on-one.
Hmm.
But conformity is a very strong drug. It's a very strong drug. And I don't buy into this whole notion that Blacks are naturally conservative. No, they're not. As a matter of fact, I don't think anyone is, because unfortunately, conservatism as a philosophy, and it doesn't matter what you're applying your conservative values to, it's always an uphill battle, because conservatism is something that's a lot harder to sell to a
True,
person,
true. Yeah.
because these popular left-wing talking points, they strike a certain chord with
Hmm.
people. And conservatism can be, at times, as much as we like to say, well, conservatism is just common sense. It's not that simple. Conservatism at times can be a very lofty intellectual pursuit. And it takes time and it takes a great deal of convincing, because, Keisha, to your point, as you have tried, uh, endlessly thus far, to convince people that you've had debates with on your show, why suffering according to scripture is meant to be endured. You can't, it's a hard sell for a lot of people, because psychologically speaking, there's a negativity bias in the mind,
Right.
that being people are more susceptible to negative emotions. It's hard to tell a person to keep their eye on the prize and suffer in the meantime while things are getting worked out long term. And that
Hmm.
isn't just true when it comes to what an omnipotent God may be doing, but that's also true of the political process as well. Sometimes
Hmm.
political change takes a very long time. And what is most important to someone who has a proper conservative mind, from my humble point of view, is someone who understands not the importance of trying to reach a desired outcome, but the importance of protecting the sanctity of the process. But we'll talk more. We'll talk more about that
Okay.
as we walk through.
All right.
Is a focus on justice. I think that comes from, I mean, when you talk about abolition, when you talk about overcoming Jim Crow, these are things that the church was in the middle of. And again, most of those people, the civil rights movement, if you read in the book, this is a movement that believes in the authority of scripture. This wasn't I think progressives have kind of tried to co-opt it. It wasn't a progressive movement in that sense. Now, there were some leaders who had gone that way, but if you talk to the people, the Fannie Lou Hamers, the
let me let him
Fred
get this sentence out.
they weren't moving anywhere away from the Bible. And so I think it's important for people to know that. The distinctive, though, is the engagement in social action.
Okay. What do you got?
Okay. Now he says that they were basing this on the Bible. Of course, they're basing it on a social justice, social gospel interpretation of scripture, of the Bible. But that's, of course, a totally separate conversation. Now we're having a debate over what the Bible message actually is and what scripture actually states, and what a true Bible believing Christian is supposed to do. He said that many of the leadership within the civil rights movement had gone that way, but see, he's doing the exact same thing that he did when he characterized the church. The movement had gone that way, but many people who were dedicated to the civil rights movement were peoples who were traditionally Bible-based. They were not based, and he goes on at a later point, and you'll hear when we get to that point where Keisha plays it, where Mr. Giboney says that he himself is not a progressive Christian. That's what he says. He's not
right.
Now, I don't know if he's a progressive Christian per se, but he sure is a progressive in other areas, particularly given the fact that he supports the civil rights movement. Now, he just named two people in particular, and I'll just camp out on them for a second, particularly Fannie Lou Hamer, because he brings up Fannie Lou Hamer's name more than once during this conversation.
He writes about her a lot in his book. She's brought up a lot. Actually, while you're talking, I'm going to go ahead and bring up some of her some of his quotes of her. But
okay.
Go ahead.
So he mentions her a few times, and during this interview, as to say that she is one of the exemplars within the civil rights movement to whom we should look to as an example of what the best of the civil rights movement was. Because there comes a point in the conversation, Keisha, where you bring up King's Marxism. And Mr. Giboney, right? Mr. Giboney does not deny, and let me just set the record straight. This is not a retroactive attack on Justin, but this is me challenging his ideas. Okay. I don't know him personally. I don't have anything against him. He came on, he was gracious, he gave Keisha his time, he showed her respect, and they had a civil conversation. And I'm going to do my best to respect him, but I am challenging him on his points of view. He brings up Fannie Lou Hamer a few times, and he says, well, to go back to when you spoke about King's communism to some of the people that he was affiliated with, Mr. Giboney does not deny Dr. King's affiliations. I don't know if he knows about it. I don't know if he thinks it's true. I don't know. He doesn't deny it, but the response that he gives is to say, well, there were other individuals involved with the civil rights movement that were not connected with those kinds of people or connected with those people, something like that. But that's a fallacy right there, unless you're getting specific with respect to degrees of separation. Because if you're connected to someone who's connected, then you are vicariously connected. Say, for example, Keisha, if you know someone, right, and you say, well, I'm not connected to that person that Keisha knows. I may not know them directly, personally, intimately, but I am connected because if I am involved with the movement that you are also involved in, that also involves someone nefarious, then by extension, I too am involved with that same individual. unless you're telling me that there was a link that was broken between those two separate individuals that were 1 degree removed in terms of a relationship. But if King was connected to communists and others in the civil rights movement were connected to King, then those who were connected to King were also connected to those very same communists within the context of the entire movement. So right there, logically, that makes no sense. But he brings up Fannie Lou Hamer on multiple occasions, and he never really goes into detail about who she is or what she did. Now, you said that he wrote about her extensively. He quotes her. I don't know if you have any quotes you want to pull up, because I want to speak about Fannie Lou Hamer just briefly. But do you have anything pulled up?
So here, let me share this really quick. He says here, let's see. He says, oops, civil rights legend Fannie Lou Hamer was a model of this ethic. Well, here, let me back up one paragraph. Faithful biblical expositions like these helped an oppressed people identify the image of God, even in the most hostile manifestations of human brokenness. The only way to see human dignity in someone who hates you is to see what's invisible outside of faith. You have to want to see it and be willing to imagine it despite all other indications. You have to love God. You have to love and fear God too much not to see it. Civil rights legend Fannie Lou Hamer was a model of this ethic. Hamer had been beaten until she nearly passed out under the orders of a white highway patrolman. The beating was punishment for the ghastly offense of registering Black people to vote. Years later, she was asked how she felt about the offending officer. Even after being fined herself for the incident, while the officer got away unpunished, Hamer was gracious. She gave a logic-defying and love response saying, quote, "We have to love them and they are sick. America was sick and it needed a doctor, and we was the hope for America," end quote.
They were the hope for America. Okay, now, Fannie Lou Hamer, I was going to say something a bit underhanded about Fannie Lou Hamer's appearance, but I won't do that. She looked how she looked. That's not fair. Pardon me, God, for even thinking about it. But Fannie Lou Hamer was just like the rest of the civil rights apparatus. She was a radical through and through. There were a lot of things that happened to Fannie Lou Hamer, and this is how they get you with how they weave these narratives. They talk about how she was beaten by police. Fannie Lou Hamer almost died, probably. So the story goes, on multiple occasions. She was shot at. I think she had her. So the story goes. Again, it's hard to tell exactly what's legend and what's not legend, and we'll probably get to that because a lot of the attacks on members of this progressive coalition in the 1950s and 1960s that were secretly backed by communists. If you're not familiar with the history, a lot of these instances were self-imposed. These were false flag attacks that they committed against themselves in order to gain sympathy for their cause. And so it's very hard to know what is fact and what is fiction with regard to a lot of the claims that are made, with respect to racially motivated attacks against Black activists and so on. We know that it did happen, but we also know that false flag attacks happened as well. Look no further than the case of Miles Horton. Of course, if any of you who are not familiar with the case of Miles Horton, he was a member of the Communist Party who was connected to Dr. Martin Luther King, and he was caught by law enforcement setting fire to his own home and blaming it on white racists. And I am, again, I have no evidence, and I have no proof of this, but I firmly believe that even some of those church bombings may have very well been acts committed not by members of the Ku Klux Klan or coalition white racists, but those church bombings have very well been committed by members of the Communist Party. And so there were a lot of things that happened in Lou Hamer. She famously, of course, she didn't have any children. Because so the story goes, again, she was forcibly sterilized without her consent. Says that I guess she went in for a routine checkup, or I think there was fear that she may have had cancer. and so she put under the knife to extract a tumor, and she woke up to discover that she had been sterilized. This the claim, of course, is another further evidence of racism because she was a Black woman, and they didn't want her breeding and so on. But anyway, so Fannie Lou Hamer went through some very harsh things. But nevertheless, to get to what she actually did in her civil rights work, her activist work, her claim to fame is that she was the co-chair of something called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party.
Wait a minute, Chuck, your audio just started really, it's kind of staticky, but now it's got a little bit worse for some reason. Let's see. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Okay, there you go. Oh wait, I can't hear you though. Hold on. Say something. I can't hear you. Drop down and come back up. Yeah, drop down and come back. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. Chuck will be right back. We're trying to get the audio good so we can hear him clearly. What's up, Pamela? Hi, Megan. Hi, Karen. Hi, Spiritual Discernment. Hello, Polite Hammer, or Not So Polite Hammer. Let's see. Did I say Katie? Hi, Katie. Thank you, Willie Doc, for the $5 super chat. It says, I appreciate the conversation, Keisha and Chuck, and setting the record straight. Plus, I love the short you did with hubby on regarding the flesh. LOL. Yes, that was funny. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, let's see.
All right. I'm probably a little bit lower, but I want to at least try to be clear.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, let's say something.
Something?
I don't know why it was started messing up.
I could try it again.
Oh, go ahead. Talk again.
Talk again.
Yeah, try them again because they're still kind of. Yeah, let me just turn this. Go ahead, try it. Go ahead, let me see.
All right, testing.
Okay.
Testing.
I mean, it's still like staticky, but it's better. It's not so bad.
All right, not so bad. All right, well, you call me out if it gets bad again.
Okay, yeah, that's much better.
Okay. All right. Now, again, Fannie Lou Hamer's claim to fame. Like I said, I don't know when my audio started to screw up, but I mentioned a lot of the tough times, harsh times that this city went through. But Fannie Lou Hamer's saving grace was that she was amongst a very small percentage of Black Mississippians who could actually read and write. And part of this and her defiance and her boisterous sort of demeanor. Of course, Fannie Lou Hamer famously had a good singing voice, and so she garnered the attention of the radicals, of the activist apparatus, and she was plucked by none other organization than not the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, but she was plucked by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She was plucked out by SNCC. as they were engaging in these freedom rides across the South. And a lot of people see this is the thing people don't know. Okay, they think that this is about voting rights for blacks and this and the third. No, that they were doing the exact same thing that the radical Republicans were doing after the Civil War during the era of Reconstruction. They were setting up these political machines. And I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about what a political machine is, because that actually means something. It's not just some figurative term. It's a tangible term. It's an objective. It's a term that has an objective definition.
Mm-hmm.
This is what they were trying to do. They were trying to set up these political machines for the purpose of patronage. And in order to do so, they had to exploit the illiterate and the uneducated. Okay. This is a huge part of the reason why there was a revolt in the South during Reconstruction at the activities of the carpetbaggers, because the carpetbaggers were trying to set up political machines for the purpose of pulling the political rug out from underneath the states. Okay, again, this has been an ongoing philosophical issue going all the way back to America's founding, but I won't go back that far. But this is the exact same thing that was happening in the 1960s with these voter drives. People who had a better understanding, who understood the political tradition that we had inherited from our forefathers. And when I say inherited from our forefathers, I'm going all the way back to ancient Greece, right? Whose political ideas we are still carrying out to this very day, from the very beginning and all across the Western world until about the 1800s, late 1700s, but especially began to kick into high gear in the 1800s, is when you began to see these various suffrage movements. But it wasn't until then, and that is relatively recently when you consider the long history of Western civilization. It was never a foregone conclusion, okay, that every individual over the age of 18, for example, over the limit of any age should automatically be allowed to vote simply on the basis of their age.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that is fairly new, because not all men even had the right to vote in various Western countries until a certain time. These various suffrage movements began to sweep across the West and the rest. But our ancient forefathers had enough foresight to know that when you expand the franchise, you're going to ruin your civilization. And you know who else knew that? Friedrich Engels knew that, one of the co-authors of the Communist Manifesto. And I'm going to get to that, but just to pivot back to Fannie Lou Hamer, her claim to fame, once she was recruited by Schnick, which of course we know the history and legacy of Schnick, and that's going to become important as well as we go through the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But she became co-chair of something called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This was a smaller, almost like I don't necessarily want to call it a subsidiary of the Democrat Party, but somewhat of a political subsidiary. It wasn't a part of the mainstream of the Democrat Party, but it was sort of like like I said, a smaller sub party within the larger Democrat Party. This was formed in April of 1964. Okay. These were all your radical extremists. And the reason why they created these offshoot Democratic parties is because they were trying to it's the same thing that is going on in the country right now with the mainstream of the old guard Democrat Party and the Democrat Socialists of America. That's what the Mississippi Freedom Democrat Party represents, to draw an analogy for those of you who may be having a hard time understanding what I'm saying. Fannie Lou Hamer, she was one of the quarterbacks that pushed that whole agenda, because the mainstream of the Democrat Party, led by then President Lyndon B. Johnson, was denying them access in terms of having their way within within the party, because many of the traditional Democrats, those who were considered traditional Democrats for their time, they knew that the radicalism of these people was not going to fly with a national electorate. And many of them knew the Marxist influences and forces that were behind these people, particularly SNCC. SNCC was, of course, an organization. Many will say that it was started by the likes of individuals like Ella Baker, but behind the scenes, SNCC as an organization was really the brainchild of renowned communist and author of the People's History of America, none other than Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn was the keynote speaker at SNCC's first inaugural meeting, and he was the keynote speaker at their second inaugural meeting. May have even been the third, if I'm not mistaken. But Howard Zinn and the SNCC organization were tied at the hip from the very beginning. You don't hear about this that often because Howard Zinn is largely passed over. But he is probably he is not probably, but he is one of the most influential Marxist intellectuals of the 20th century. Wow. A major hero to the left. Okay. So this is what this was. 2 years later, Keisha, just to add some synchronicity to tell you that this is not an accident. 2 years later, the very same month in April of 1966, the Alabama equivalent of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party gets founded in 1966, known as the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. And I've talked about the Lowndes County Freedom Organization before, because it was the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which was started with largely with the help of Stokely Carmichael. Okay. Mm-hmm. Stokely Carmichael is the one who came up with the iconic Black Panther image. Although Stokely went on to have somewhat of an honorary position within the Black Panther Party, he was never officially a member, but the Black Panthers themselves were heavily influenced by the activities of SNCC and the Freedom Riders. And they took the symbol of the Black Panther from the Lowndes County Freedom Organization and used it to be the mascot for their organization. But what SNCC did was they particularly picked out a predominantly Black district in the South where the overwhelming majority of Black voters were illiterate. This is why they had to come up with a logo, because the mainstream Democrat Party candidates in Lowndes County had a symbol as well, but their symbol was a white rooster. What they told the voters was, never mind the name on the ballot, because like I said, many Blacks couldn't read.
Yeah.
Never mind the name on the ballot, okay? Vote for the person whose name is next to the Black Panther symbol. So that's where that came from, because they knew that these gullible, illiterate people, especially when their heads are being filled with all of this race talk, that they would empower the communists to do to exact justice on their behalf. But they needed these useful idiots, these gullible, and these are their words, not mine, to use this common communist term they use for people who are unknowingly supporting the communist agenda. So they use people who were largely uneducated. Let me tell you what, and again, people knew this is what they were doing. It wasn't just about, well, you're Black, so we don't want you to vote. That's not the case. Many people knew and understood that voting came with a responsibility. Like I said, there always been stipulations. Going all the way back to classical Greece, you had to be a property owner. There were all sorts of other things. And even, Keisha, during Reconstruction, the president of the Confederate States of America, Jefferson Davis, who had adopted a Black son, was quite fond of the utopian socialist named Robert Owen. And Jefferson Davis believed that he was a bit of a utopian himself, and he believed that there will come a time when Blacks will be ready for full citizenship, that they will be ready for the franchise. But right now, they're not ready. But he did envision a time when America would be a more perfect society, if not an ideally perfect society. These were the ideas of Jefferson Davis, the former president of the Confederate States of America. But here's what Frederick Engels thought about mass enfranchisement. I started to just go off the dome, but I figured for the sake of time, I just try to see what Google tells me, and then I can, they can give me some bullet points so I can communicate this information, and you can go and look it up in detail on your own time.
Mm-hmm.
All I typed in, I asked Google to tell me what Friedrich Engels' thoughts on revolution through mass enfranchisement. Here's what Google tells me. Friedrich Engels urged that mass enfranchisement and universal suffrage offered a powerful new democratic path for the socialist movement, rendering traditional street barricades and sudden military insurrections largely obsolete. Okay, then you can go. You can read the text on his opinions on this. It's an 1895 text, Introduction to Karl Marx's The Class Struggles in France. Because remember, universal male suffrage began in France, and we know that the later radicals in Russia and in other places were heavily influenced by the French Revolution. This is where he details this. He details how legal electoral participation had transformed the revolutionary struggle. Voting rights, voting rights, voting rights. This is why this is so important to leftists. This is key to the progressive agenda. Here are some of the strategic values of the ballot, according to Friedrich Engels. Counting strength. Voting acts as a precise gauge of working class growth by counting supporters every few years. It's a propaganda tool. By propaganda tool, what does Engels mean? He means election campaigns force opposing parties to define policies publicly against socialist attacks. Thirdly, parliamentary tribune. Elected deputies gain an authoritative platform to speak directly to opponents in parliament and the masses outside. This is why he believed the old tactics were obsolete. He said insurrections were obsolete because surprise attacks and revolutions made by small conscious minorities lag behind military power shifts. What is he saying? He's saying that, of course, you must gain control over the society and change it from within, implement a proletarian constitution, and you take over without a revolution. Don't rage against the military, take control of the military, and then use the mechanisms of that very same military to suppress your own citizenry. This was Engels' idea. Conquest of position, steady growth, slow growth, and disciplined use of legal rights. Disciplined use of legal rights steadily win over the support of the working class and middle strata. And this is exactly what the civil rights movement would do. They began with the race issue, okay, the race struggle, as communists began calling it. They took these issues that were largely non-issues, and they exaggerated them.
Agitated
them to, yeah, exactly. So that's for and in so doing, they knew that by creating a boatload of sympathy, they can then shift the civil rights infrastructure into a more economically based push for social justice. But this time, that social justice coalition would be multiracial. And this was the aim from the get-go, was to create a multiracial proletariat. But first, we must start with the race struggle. We must start within the race struggle. Fannie Lou Hamer, last thing on Fannie Lou Hamer, again, she was a leftist through and through. Aside from her co-chair as the Mississippi co-chair within the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, she was also the head of something called the Freedom Farm Cooperative. Have you heard of the Freedom Farm Cooperative?
Mm-mm.
Okay, and you can tell outright by the language what that is. Fannie Lou Hamer, through her organizing networks, tried to create a farming cooperative where families would pay in to be part of this cooperative, and the leadership, which included her, would allocate the resources generated on this farming co-op to the people who bought in. She claimed that the only qualification one needs in order to be part of the cooperative was to be poor. So you know exactly what this did, right? this capsized the organizational structure, in that you had more output than you had input. You had
Of
more
course.
takers than you had producers, because
Mm-hmm.
many of the people who bought in to the co-op did not actually buy in, because they claimed that they were too poor to pay the monthly membership fee, which was roughly $1 a month. So here you had Fannie Lou Hamer and her organization trying to feed all of these black families, because the white man was doing it wrong. They were
Mm-hmm.
exploited. Sharecroppers are doing all these things. But so we as black folks, we'll be the landowners and so on and so forth. And we're going to make sure that everyone eats and that everyone gets their fair share. But slowly but surely, as you could imagine, within a few years, this farming collective was gone because they no longer could fund it.
That's how they all go. I mean, it's basically like Zoran Mamdani's the free grocery stores. Same concept. These people don't change. But let's keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's where the disconnect is. So in your book, you were talking about basically like that is the distinction, and that when you looked at like white evangelicals, or we'll just say white evangelicals, during that time, that basically like they didn't do enough. And I guess I just wonder, was it that they didn't do enough, or do we just approach that topic differently? Like, do we come from it from a different, just to kind of summarize what I was trying to say, we have the left and the right, and we fundamentally see life differently. Like, we approach life differently as the left and the right. And so in his book, and he's saying that the white folks didn't do it right. Well, my question was basically like, well, how can we say that when we don't even approach it the same way? Like, maybe it's not wrong, it's just different. So here's I'll speed it up a little bit so we can get to his response.
So I don't want anybody.
Oh, yes. I'm not saying that you are.
The approaches. So I think it's both. I think the approaches are different, and I think they didn't do enough. Not only did they not do enough in some instances, talking about white Christian conservatives, they perpetuate.
Sorry, and I just want to say, what Justin, he's the founder of the AND campaign. So his whole thing is like, we got to do justice and love. We got to do this and that. So if you hear him like, no shade to Justin, but riding the fence, I mean, that's kind of that's what he does. So, if you're wondering why he's not just kind of like plainly saying a thing and landing on a place, that's his thing. Okay.
This, and you hear black people talk about this, from Frederick Douglass to Fannie Lou Hamer, Fred Shuttlesworth, all devout Christians. Not only did you have a situation where maybe they saw it, but they just didn't reach out. No, they were in leadership positions, and they were perpetuating some of these things. I don't particularly think that's disputed historically. Now, your everyday person.
Yes.
I wrote this down when I was listening. I wrote down white evangelicals and white Christian conservatives perpetuating this or this thing, and I put here in my notes like, what does he mean? What is doing what? Doing what? Perpetuating what?
Perpetuating. Let's see. Hold on, I have to go back to my notes. I
made note of it because I don't recall him ever explaining.
So one of the quotes in his book is, it says, this is on page 113, it says, Negro must do for himself. It says, this lady, she wrote 12 things a Negro must do for himself. She recognized that her people, although oppressed, still had agency, and she loved them enough to not let them waste it. She knew white America was a source of many of Black America's problems, but she also knew it wasn't honest or profitable to pretend we didn't need to do better in some respects. So I think he was talking about the approach, like, that I forgot. What did he just say? I lost the question. I forgot what did you ask? What did he?
Yeah, he said that they weren't doing they were doing some of this. And
Oh
I'm like,
yes, meaning like not seeing struggle and seeing like oppression in Black neighborhoods with like different things, or the segregation and all of these things, and they didn't do anything about it. Like the Christians back then, they weren't doing enough. Like he was saying, yes, there is a different approach, and they didn't do enough, if that makes sense.
what on so and he talks about, and this is funny
Of like
because they
helping Black people, Black Christians, their fellow Christians, like out of these situations. That's what I understood him to say. I think that's a fair characterization of his thoughts. But
you
it
know
doesn't seem you don't have. I want you to let's
okay I'm
let's
sorry.
move on,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I know you got plenty more to when you have a like something obviously problematic
about marriage, when he talks about men and women, that can be extended based on the context also that we get from the Old Testament. Progressives will say, well, Jesus,
actual neighbor. Why do you think that they're like Washington D.C. or your local government? You know what I mean? Like I think he means your actual neighbor. Why do you think that there is because we don't see Jesus, commanding us to go and, demand different things from the government. We don't see Jesus going to the government, the natural government, to solve these problems. He instructs us to deal with each other, in these things. What do you think about that?
well, I think Jesus gives us some general principles, and we have to be very careful in limiting those principles to what we want to see. So, for instance, progressives will say, well, Jesus never said anything about homosexuality. Therefore, we should. No, he gave us some general principles when he talks about marriage, when he talks about men and women, that can be extended based on the context also that we get from the Old Testament. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to justice. Sure, I think what your neighbor means, and we don't want to limit what neighbor means, because that's part of the whole conversation that Jesus was correcting. It's people within your frame of influence, right? People that you can actually do something to help, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Christians, conservative Christians in the South, who were governors, who were voters, and all these things, who are perpetuating Jim Crow and all these other things instead of doing something about it. So I think that fits squarely within what we would say is your neighbor and somebody that you should help. And in too many instances, parts of the white church did not do that. And that's really all I'm saying. But I'm very hesitant to try to limit it to how can I limit who my neighbor is? I think that's exactly what Jesus was trying to get us not to do, is limit that based on our interest or our narrative.
I guess oh gosh, my insides were just like, oh gosh, I was, oh Lord, y'all just don't even know. Like, I had to really, like, Keisha, just be in journalist mode, not debate mode. But okay, what do you got there?
Not attack mode. Yeah, you were in journalist mode. I
mode.
think he implies it there, but I think he in a few moments, I think he's going to say, because I wrote down in my notes here, I said that he said that you should be mindful, because he said that it's not about DC, it's also about what happens locally. And when he's speaking, he's talking about politically, what happens locally, politically. And he said that you should consider your neighbor when you vote. I had to write that down. I was very illuminating, that you must consider your neighbor when you vote. Really? So what exactly does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean anything. So therefore it can mean everything. The moment that you start saying that the state exists to protect the Commonwealth, or just to protect the rights of the first person plural, the community, it presupposes the existence of the state, for it is we who give consent, we give over, we must sacrifice a great bit of our freedom so that we can be governed. You understand? And
Mm-hmm.
so when you start pointing out things that others should not be legally permitted to do,
Mm-hmm.
these are all political questions, they're philosophical questions, but there are a lot of things that can be made to seem like, vis-a-vis the political process, that someone isn't being generous or loving or considerate of me based upon the policies that they support or the politicians that they vote for.
And based
It's
upon your own need,
based
based,
upon your
and
own need.
it's not just you said philosophical. It's
It's,
philosophical. It's
uh,
but it's
political.
biblical too. Like this
It's
is,
biblical too.
yeah, like, because your neighbor is and I don't mean like the person in your neighborhood, but even just the people that are before you, that you can look eyeball to eyeball, like the Good Samaritan. He was walking by. It was not somebody over, oh, I see a poor person, let me go protest, let me go march for more money. That's not how it was handled. And so I was trying to get him to see that when Jesus talks about our neighbor, he's talking about literally the person in front of you, not somebody that you have to wait to see, on November 4th or during a midterm. You know what I mean? Like, we really have this whole, like, help the poor, help your neighbor, help the oppressed. I think we've abdicated that responsibility as the church, particularly the black, quote unquote, black church, to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
To the government, rather, which is worse. But anyway, this is not my critique, this is yours, so go ahead.
No,
Did you want me to move on to the
no,
next
no.
one?
Yeah, you can keep playing it because
Okay.
here is yeah. I start to have some thoughts and ideas about.
I'm saying, sorry.
I start to have some ideas and thoughts about progressivism because even explaining Engel's ideas of how to accomplish the goals of the revolution through the political process. This is what progressivism is, and this is what the civil rights movement was. The civil rights movement was a progressive movement, and it was solely based on trying to change society from the top down by infiltrating DC and getting the federal government to override or upend the rights of the states. And this all began with the Brown v. Board of Education decision, which many people say was the start of the civil rights movement. It was terrible. It was terrible, with a terrible constitutional interpretation.
Mm.
Even when you read the write-up of Brown v. Board of Education, the majority opinion in that case was just awful. It was a blatant example of social engineering, and this is precisely what the civil rights apparatus wanted, because their long-term goals or long-term goal, should I say, was massive wealth and income redistribution. Their long-term goal was the Sovietization of America, and it all starts with nice-sounding slogans like vote with your neighbor in mind, or ending racial segregation and all these things. You see, people didn't, and racial segregation was something that started after the Civil War, and this was something that was mutually agreed upon by both blacks and whites because of the political rancor that was going on after the bloodiest war in America's history. Blacks and whites chose to live apart, and this isn't just something. I mean, this is somewhat of a natural thing. But folks got along better when they, decided to shack up in their own respective enclaves.
Mm-hmm.
But short term, over the long haul, racial tolerance is something that must grow organically, right? It can't be legislated. And the races were slowly but surely coming together. And at the same time, a lot of these Jim Crow laws, as they were called, were coming off the books because many people were ignoring them. I don't, I'm going to unpack Plessy versus Ferguson, but of course, Plessy versus Ferguson was an attempt by the state of Louisiana to push the argument to the federal courts so that Jim Crow segregation could be ended, because a white-owned railway company did not want to continue segregating their passengers, and it was shot down because the federal government, Plessy versus Ferguson, was bad constitutional interpretation, and so was Brown v. Board of Education. The federal government does not have the legal permissibility or permission to force segregation, nor does the federal government has the authority to force integration. Okay, it was an overcorrection on a bad constitutional interpretation. But never mind that, the reality is that many folks in the South and elsewhere were just blatantly ignoring these ordinances. I've said this, a lot of people who challenge me, and when I say that if you would have just left well enough alone and let the process play itself out, this is how you get long-term racial reconciliation, and not the madness that we have today, which is the direct fruit of the civil rights movement. You let people work themselves out on their own terms. A lot of people say, no, man, if you would have just left it alone, then white racists would have continued to do what they did. But as my good friend, my boss and research partner, Shadow Jackson, reminds us that for every colored only sign, there was a white only sign. So where's this attitude? Where's this notion that blacks being excluded from what
Wait a minute, wait, say that one more time.
For every colored only sign, there was a whites only sign. So where do we get off suggesting that Jim Crow was something that exclusively affected black people?
I have
Whites were
never
excluded from black.
thought
Never
about
thought about
that.
it that way, did you? Yeah.
So because they would put them together.
Yeah.
Like it would say like whites only, blacks only.
Right. So where's the white? Why aren't the whites so upset?
That's crazy, because that's equal.
Exactly. It's equality. You
Yo,
didn't think.
I've never thought about that. That is so. John, we always have these moments. This is my Martin Luther King moment. You be having me looking crazy up here, right? You remember that? That was years ago. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But have y'all in the chat, have y'all ever thought about that? If you think back, the black and white water fountains, there was always whites only, blacks only.
White people want to complain. Where are they moving it at? And the crazy thing about it is, if you don't, human beings, we change, but we don't change, right? It's one of those weird paradoxes. We don't change. And I say that because there are a lot of naysayers out there who say, no, things wouldn't have changed. And, what do you mean people were just ignoring them? And the same phenomenon was happening in South Africa during apartheid as well. The government had a certain incentive to do this, but in the private sector, of course, it's bad for business to discriminate. We won't walk through that, but those of you who understand economics know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, look at the analogy of what happened. Something that occurred more recently in 2020 with the COVID-19 restrictions. Okay, how many times every day you woke up and you went on your phone, there was a story about people being busted for having too many people at their house? People gathering for holidays. Remember, they told you couldn't be around but so many people. You couldn't go outside. You couldn't go to the beach. You couldn't go to the gym. You had people all across the breadth and width of this nation, in red states, blue states, wherever, and they were just like, man, this social distancing, these medically arbitrarily mandated social distancing rules where while in public you had to remain however many feet, I don't even remember what it was, feet from a person.
6 feet.
6 feet from a person. We were told by the so-called experts from the get-go that masks don't stop the spread, but we were told to wear masks anyway, and psychologically it kind of made us feel safer, even though we knew intellectually that wasn't the case. We did it anyway, just go out and do the things that we needed to do without being thrown out of various establishments. But as time went on, people began to say, the hell with this, I'm not doing it anymore. The same thing was happening in the so-called Jim Crow South by the 1950s. Blacks and whites were like, if I have friends and if there's something that's mutually beneficial in some type of arrangement, freedom of association, right, per the First Amendment. No, the freedom of association is sort of like a right that's implied with within the freedom of assembly as per the First Amendment. But people were saying, the hell with this, we're not doing it. This was the case throughout the Jim Crow South. Blacks and whites weren't, there were many people who just weren't enforcing the law, and people who were bound by the law were simply just ignoring it. So, like I said, this idea that there was this racial this is just nonsense. It's not true. And as a matter of fact, we can move on once I state this. To go back to the Brown v. Board of Education decision, I urge everyone to go and read the majority opinion that was written up, I think, by Justice Warren. Justice Warren said that, because remember, separate but equal was the precedent, but that was established in Plessy versus Ferguson.
Right.
Chief Justice, I don't know if he was, and he may have been the Chief Justice at the time, but nevertheless, Justice Warren, who wrote the majority opinion, said that blacks and white schools were in fact equal, and to the extent that they were not equal, they were becoming equal. He even goes on to describe how their staff are paid equally, blacks and whites are paid equally. There's adequate supplies in black schools, adequate supplies in white schools. They have all the same things that the white kids have. But he said that people looking at outcomes, and this became the basis from time immemorial, beginning with the civil rights movement. You have the establishment of the disparate impact philosophy, I think in the 1971 decision of Griggs versus Duke Power, right? And from that point on, how we determined if something was racially discriminatory, we looked at statistical disparities.
Right.
And what Justice Warren did in that decision in 1954 is that he looked at the statistical disparities between educational achievement amongst blacks versus amongst whites. And what he found was whites outpaced blacks in terms of their educational achievement, even though he could find no tangible examples of inequality in schooling because blacks didn't perform as well. There had to be some intangible factors afflicting blacks in a very specific way, even if those things could not be objectified. Those were, I'm paraphrasing the decision, and Justice Warren based it on his belief that since blacks are excluded from white schools, they are psychologically impacted in that they are made to feel inferior. And he was hearkening back to a study that was done by a psychologist by the name of Kenneth B. Clark. This became known as the famous doll study, where, according to Kenneth B. Clark, of course, black girls would rather play with white dolls. And so this is what happened in the 1960s with the phenomenon that I also mentioned on your show before called interdisciplinarity, where you began to see so-called legal experts who are judges trying to use clinical, psychological information to make legal decisions. And nowhere in the Constitution does it permit the federal government to involve itself in the educational process. And since it is not explicitly outlined in the Constitution, one has to refer to the 10th Amendment. Anything not specified in any other amendment falls under the auspice of the 10th Amendment, and it goes back down to the states according to the dictates of the Constitution. And so the federal government had no legal right to tell schools that they had to desegregate. It's not in the law. It's not in the law. But again, this just set the precedent for federal overreach.
Exactly. And it goes to this system that you were, or this political machine that you're talking about, because if I can get my people in the judges' seats and in the, in all these strategically different places, we can't be stopped. And that's kind of like the Democrat the left mentality, not saving the country, what's best for the country. It's political power. That's it. Let me just thank you to say thank you to Daisy Freiberger for the 10 jewels, the gold coin. Thank you, thank you. And to Jetty T, the 1,000 jewels. Thank you. Goat trophy. Appreciate it. Let's see. You know, when I think about the gospel as a whole, it's, or just even the Bible, it is very, it's very much a relationship into the world, and whatever I think, you know,
sphere of influence, that I can make sure my votes actually help. And so I'm not necessarily, let's just talk about local. I'm not saying anything about Washington, D.C. Even on a local level, I have to think about how the policies that I support and other things impact the people around me. And that's really all I'm saying. If there's injustice coming based on how I vote or who I support, I have to think about that, because that's impacting other people. Surely the people who I'm engaged with on a daily basis are extremely important. That doesn't mean that that's the only people that I have any type of obligation to based on the gospel. Anybody that's in my sphere of influence, I need to be making sure that I'm impacting them in a positive way to the extent that I can.
Okay. But when it comes to the Bible, though, that's not that's not what God says. It's not, oh, whoever's in your sphere of influence politically. You know, that's what I'm saying. It's still kind of like that. Your neighbor is your political. When you see somebody in need, your default is not what can I do within myself to help them. It's, oh, let me go to the government to see what they can do to help the person, my sphere of influence. That's how, at least that's how what it sounded like to me. But okay, we'll keep going. What was there was like one thing that you were really like.
Yeah, I was really heated about when he talks about the bail reform.
Okay, let's go.
I wrote down here when he said that at a point during the conversation, he says that the majority of Black churchgoers do not believe in liberation theology, and I say yes, they do.
Okay,
they
so let's
absolutely
do that one first, and then the bail reform. Okay. You said the
and he talked about in the 10th Amendment reads, the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. If the states wanted their schools segregated, then they had the constitutional right to segregate them.
Right, and that I'm guessing that's like one of the laws that they would say needed to be taken off the books, I guess.
Yeah, and in another point, Keisha, he talked about Justin talked about systems and how we need to challenge systems, and he mentioned how, for example, abortion, that's a system. Let me speak on this quickly. How abortion, this is a system, and how else do we stop abortion if we don't go after the system? And I'm saying to myself, again, you're using these terms and you're speaking about them very vaguely, and you're throwing out terms using them as a means of figure of speech when you're really trying to hide the fact, in my humble opinion, that you just don't know what you're talking about. Because when you're talking about systems, the system, in other words, is the process by which we reach a certain outcome. These radicals are the ones who want to attack and change the system whenever that very same system doesn't work for them. Think about it this way. When Roe v. Wade and, the right to abortion was already legal in some states. As a matter of fact, one of my political heroes, Ronald Reagan, on my shirt, he was one of the first governors to sign abortion into law in California back in the 1960s. This was before the 1973 decision, Roe v. Wade. And so, not necessarily a Reagan moment that I'm particularly proud of, but there's more context to that story, but I won't get into that. But there were some states where it was legal to get to have an abortion, okay? But again, per the progressive playbook, they thought that they could change the laws, they could circumvent the legislature, by way of the judiciary, right, vis-a-vis a more progressive interpretation of the written letter, the Constitution, which they refer to as a living and breathing document, as opposed to, right? So this became the number one play, the largest arrow in the quiver of the progressive was the courts. This is what Roe v. Wade did in 1973. But going after the system, you see, Keisha, because this very same system is what upended stare decisis in the Dobbs decision, Keisha. There may have been different justices, but it was the same court.
Right.
The system is not abortion. Abortion is just the act, whether it's legal or illegal. Like you mentioned, who in the world is forcing these people to conceive children that they don't want and then voluntarily going to an abortion clinic and having the baby killed? That's not a system.
Yeah.
The system is the process through which we arrive at a specific outcome. In this case, the Supreme Court took it upon itself to legalize abortion in all 50 states, upending our 10th Amendment protections as citizens of the United States. As I just outlined, that's the exact same thing that they did in the Brown v. Board of Education decision. And it was through that very same system and that very same process that we then turned around and got the outcome that we wanted. Remember when Theron Williams said in his interview last time that, you know, in order to stop Clarence Thomas, the next Democrat president that gets in office needs to consider adding more seats to the Supreme Court. This is the same thing that Franklin Delano Roosevelt famously wanted to do. And at the time, even Democrats in his own party thought the idea was insane because FDR wanted full unilateral control. He did not want to get in the way of his agenda.
Right.
So that's what we mean when we talk about the system. He doesn't even understand what the system is and what the system means. Because when you rearrange the system, you change the incentive structure, which then changes the way in which we as human beings receive feedback. It affects the knowledge that we receive, and it goes on to then affect the decisions that we make based upon the knowledge that we have at the time when any said decision is made. So he's not thinking about the long-term consequences of what it is that he's talking about just because you don't get the thing that you want. Even if it takes time, Keisha, it took 50 some odd years, but eventually the system worked.
Yeah, it is true. You know, the Bible is, God is a very patient God, you know, like, and this is something that all believers can remember. Whenever something comes quick, typically, God will answer you quickly sometimes, but most of the time, he don't. He's not that kind of guy. He typically has a plan, and because long suffering, patience is one of the fruits of the Spirit. So when something comes quick or something comes, you know, you get an answer from God quickly, I always question things that come very quick, especially when it's supposed to be from God. That's just something that everybody should do. Just question it, because the enemy can appear like an angel of light. And so those things that we want quickly can often be damaging to us if we get it too soon, or we think we get the thing that we think we want, then when we get it, we don't want to know it because it's not actually what we really wanted in the first place. And just one thing on the abortion thing, it seems like when that thing came up, it's like, we already know that we can't take out human beings, so why would this law even be considered in the first place, since we already say that we can't take out human beings? You know what I'm saying? Because the algorithm and stuff. But I think the argument became down to, what is a person? What defines a person? We're talking about personhood. This is crazy. This is the left, though. Now we got to define. See, and this is, we're gonna get back to this.
There was other.
What's a woman? What is it? I don't know. What is a person? Yes, there's some trend here. All right.
And there was other companion decisions when is the fetus viable, and a woman can legally abort a child when her health is at stake, and then what constituted health included their economic welfare. In other words, if a woman is too poor to take care of a child, she's legally allowed to abort it, and so it's a lot. But anyway.
Yeah. For sure.
Foolishness.
Be Christians that do lean more heavily into this. They're probably not going to call it, I believe in Black Liberation Theology, or I'm a Marxist, or I'm a communist, or something like that. But the ideas that they voice that's the fruit of what it comes from.
Let
so
me just make
I agree with you.
points.
I don't think
it's there.
Yeah.
But I would make 2 points about how limited it is. Number
Okay.
one, if you ask Black Christians about trans ideology, 70, almost 80% of them will say that makes no sense. A man cannot become a woman, right? Do you know what's keeping the Democratic Party from going full democratic socialist? Black Christians.
Oh, I believe that.
So that's what I'm saying. I mean, I think we need to put that into context to say, yes, there are parts of the church, and certainly, I mean, we probably agree a lot on what's happening to the Black leadership class and professional class in a lot of spaces. I talk about that all the time, and I talked about it in the book.
Yeah.
That is a problem. However, we have to put it within the context of that's not where most Black Christians are at. And so when that becomes the example of what the reason that a lot of white evangelicals think that's what represents the Black church is because that's what they see, but they're not in relationship with the other people. They might not be at the mega church, but they're pastors of decent sized churches. They're just not the ones that you're going to see on social media or going to be reported on your favorite podcast, but they are there, and we can see it through many of the positions that a lot of Christians take. But I'm with you. There are some places where it's leaking and some places that need to be fixed. I talk about that all the time, and I try to keep secular progressive ideology out of all parts of the church. Yeah. That doesn't mean that I can't look at white evangelical spaces and say, hey, here's stuff that you guys could do better too. And here's stuff that, we as a church need to deal with and acknowledge.
I mean, Walter Rauschenbusch, that's a white guy. Like, he's the one that kind of really made. So anyway, okay. So I do believe, I do believe that there is a remnant in the quote unquote Black church that are just not having it. There are some older people who they're not going to get on board. They might be Black Liberation, believe all that stuff. But when it comes to like trans, they're not going with that. But they're still voting for Democrats. Like, they might not believe in that, but it doesn't change the way that they vote.
Right,
like if you ask them and that's the thing, it's like if you talk to them one-on-one, no, they're not. I do believe that if a Jamal Bryant, for instance, got in front of his congregation and said, okay, everybody, we're going full trans, they're gonna give him some pushback, but they're still gonna vote Democrat. Like, they're still gonna vote Democrat, but they're not. The Democrats know that if they keep that at the forefront, they are going to lose more faith-based people, Christian, Muslim, whatever, because that's a hard sell, within itself. So that's my 2 cents on that. But go ahead, Chuck.
I don't buy it for a second. I don't know what sort of anecdotal, quote unquote, evidence that he has from the people that he talks to. He said 70%. I think that's the number he just pulled out of his behind. We have scientific data from the Pew Research Center from approximately 10 years ago, whose findings uncovered the fact that 65% of Blacks view socialism favorably. 65% of Blacks view socialism favorably. I firmly believe that most Blacks don't have an intimate knowledge of what socialism even is, but you can convince them that they ought to vote for a socialist candidate if you can exploit their racial paranoia, even to the extent that they don't care, that they know that men are men and women are women, and the whole trans ideology is completely ridiculous. Even if many of them intellectually know that on its face, they are willing to disregard that if the side that also has that coalition as part of its constituency, okay, that they will at the same time make sure that they fight for various social justice / racial causes that matter to them. And so it's irrelevant, because most Black people, as a minority bloc in this country, they all vote for political machines. said that I would describe this earlier, and it's a phenomenon that is not something that's unique to Black folks, but it's something that unique to different minorities, particularly in the late 19th, early 20th century. Italians and the Irish and so on. I mean, they were caught up in these Democrat Party political machines, or even Republican Party political machines there can be. And what you get is you have individuals, oftentimes they come from within the group, but sometimes they can come from without, but they come from within the group. And once they quote unquote make it, they act as spokespersons for the entire collective, because there is a sense of it, maybe whether this is natural or maybe this is something that is nurtured into them, but they have this natural distrust for anyone outside of their ethnic group because they see themselves as these foreigners in a strange land. This was the phenomenon during these mass of migration to the United States in the late 19th, early 20th century. Even though Blacks have been here a lot longer, Blacks were subsequently politically colonized and then went on to be subject to political machinery. Oftentimes, in other examples with other ethnic groups, you had large swaths of those minority populations who didn't even speak the English language. They were just told to vote for this particular person because that one particular person claimed to, whether it was real or imagined, they had a direct connect, a unique relationship with these specific group of people who, for some reason or another, saw themselves as not particularly being part of the mainstream. And so you vote for the political machine because you don't want to spend the cost of acquiring knowledge. And so you act irrationally based on brand favorability
and fear.
But here's the thing. This is how it works in the private sector. You may not know everything that there is to know about cars, but if you had one good experience with a particular car manufacturer, that becomes your brand, that becomes your model. The same is true with clothes and anything else. It works in politics that way as well. You don't have time to invest in acquiring knowledge because knowledge itself comes at a cost. Ignorance also comes at a cost now. But knowledge comes at a cost. So as much ignorance comes at a greater cost, one can argue, but knowledge comes at a cost as well. And oftentimes, in order to cut down on the cost of acquiring knowledge, we vote for the brand. We vote for the thing that we're familiar with instead of knowing the intricate parts of how that thing actually functions or who that person actually is. So this is how a political machine is traditionally defined. A political machine is a tight local party organization led by a single boss or small group that keeps control of a city or state government by trading rewards, jobs, and services for votes. This is how the Democrat Party apparatus functions in this country. Again, and this is not, this is primarily a Democrat thing, particularly in these large urban centers, but any political party can be privy to this. They set up patronage systems, community help and strict control. A strong boss directed all party actions to make sure their chosen candidates always won their elections. The leaders within these political machines have government jobs, contracts, and favors to loyal party supporters instead of checking for job skills. These are just various characteristics of political machines that Google gave me with a quick Google search. But this is what we have. So when people talk about, well, why does the Republican Party do more outreach to these groups? Because they don't want to waste resources trying to build a political bridge with the people who do not want them there because their message will not resonate. That's an internal thing. It's not an external thing. It's an internal thing because most Black people arrive to the political process with an attitude of what can you do for me? And that's not the role of a representative. You're supposed to do for yourself.
Exactly.
And that's not a conservative message. So when he say that, he's lying. I don't know, he's being disingenuous or he's just being deliberately obtuse. One or the other, either way, you reach the same result.
All right, we only got 20 minutes because dog time flies by. Okay, here we go. This is Bale.
Okay.
The whole social gospel thing a thing. That's a white guy. So there's nobody's innocent, in this infiltration of this idea. The last thing I'll say is that the infiltration that came in, it's when we talk about trans and LGBTQ, most people are going to be against that, Blacks in particular. But when it comes to abortion and economics, they can be extremely progressive in the economics, and definitely like, okay, excusing abortion, like, well, we kind of gotta, because we want the economic thing, like we gotta vote for these people even though they're pushing abortion. It's like, because how they view economics in the redistribution, which Martin Luther King talked about. They kind of take on that that ideology of this is how economics should be done. More from the like from each I forgot the quote. What is the thing? Hold on, let me get
each
it.
According to each according to his ability, to each according to his need.
Yeah, but that's in the Bible, but they just have it flipped. Did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
It's in the parable where Jesus is talking about the talents. That's low down and dirty. That is so low down and dirty. We've never talked about that, but that's the thing. Hold on, I thought I had the spot, but I guess I don't. Hold on, y'all. Hold on. Let's see, bail reform.
Oh wow, you can just you had it snipped.
Huh?
That you had it snipped.
No, I can search.
It'll take you right to
the transcript, but it took me to the wrong one. I don't know. We must have talked about it a few times. Okay. Times when we're lumping all these things together, we're not. Let's say there's a problem with bail reform in Florida. Many times it's just, we gotta fix the system and we gotta go to Washington and fix. It's like it makes it seem like everywhere is one thing, or we get so collective in this that we never kind of pull back
between different localities and all that. And this is what I would tell you about that, Keisha. From my reading and my research, the civil rights movement would be against that. They had 4 steps that they would go through before they entered social action. One of them was fact finding. So you just couldn't take a general narrative and place it on any locality or any place that you were at. You had to make sure that what you were actually saying, any allegation that you were making actually happened. And this is time they took to make, because it's not just, that's not justice if I'm not being truthful. It's not justice if I'm applying the wrongs of one area to another area. And so they actually were deliberate about making sure that didn't happen. Something else they used to do is self-purification. Now you say, you have a hard time understanding why I would say the church should kind of be like the civil rights movement. These were people who were able to take a lot of punishment and violence and still teach people not to hate the people that did it to them. Why would a Christian not want to take those things? And so I think it's happening.
Oh man!
You knew that was the one because I text you. He said that I almost passed out. This is why. So the civil rights movement was very particular because they only pointed out certain areas where there were issues to try to make the civil rights movement seem like the reform movement. No, Dr. King said it himself that he wanted to uproot the entire society, that the United States and its white middle class value system, I'm paraphrasing him, had to be totally transformed. This is what he said. King would also go on to say that we need to radically transform the society, and perhaps we need to move towards a democratic socialism. He also said, and I'm paraphrasing him, that he didn't want to call it communism or a communist society, but he said, quote, a rose under any other name smells just as sweet, end quote. So we don't have to call it communism, but we're going to get there. And make sure, let's not use those words out loud. And so this whole idea, and when he said that they would do research, they wouldn't do research to find out where there were actual problems. They would do research to try to find out where they can exploit grievances. which is precisely what they did in the event of the Children's March. And I wanted to talk about that too, because he mentioned children, and that really upset me, because I'm like, Mr. Giboney should know better. He should know what happened during the Children's March. He should know what King and his henchmen, men like James Bevel, went in there and did to those children. It was one of the most disgusting things to ever come out of the civil rights movement. Maybe I'll talk about that next time. But King would say during an interview with the reporter when he was asked, what do you say, Mr. King, to people who say that you're the troublemaker, that everywhere you and your people go, you are causing these things? Why is it that trouble seems to find you? Dr. King would say, and I'm going to paraphrase him, but I don't know if I'm getting it word for word, but he says something to the effect that our job is to find examples, find things where problems, what he said? He said that sometimes you have to create a problem. This is what he said. And I think this is almost a direct quote. You have to find a problem so that we can get to the real problem. So he admitted that he purposely and deliberately stirred up trouble, which is what the whole nonviolent social disobedience thing was about in the first place. Was to go out and deliberately break the law, provoke a reaction, spin the narrative like the evil government was coming down on you, when the government has no recourse other than force when a citizen does not comply. King knows that, which is why he did it, which is what he was trained to do at the Highlander Folk School. He said that sometimes you have to create a problem in order to get to the real problem, end quote. So
That's so
they weren't looking for a
destructive.
real
Like
problem. They were
that's not Christ. That's not the God. That's not biblical. Are you crazy? That is. Go
to a
ahead. I'm
to a
sorry.
to a man, Keisha, that came right out of his own mouth. And King knew that by going out and getting beat and abused, and what happened on the Pettus Bridge, and even though King was the head of the turnaround march, as it became known as, because he tried to do the same thing John Lewis and his folks did, but instead of going across the bridge and getting beat, King turned around, and a lot of people mocked him for it. That became known as the turnaround march. But that's a whole other story.
Oh.
And so King knew that by onlookers, particularly black youth, this is key. And I'm gonna go back to the Children's March during another conversation, because I think, yeah, I'm gonna ask you in front of, I'm gonna put you on the spot in front of the audience, y'all. Do y'all want to hear me and Keisha do a second part to comment on this interview? Because I want to finish up on the rest of this, because I'm not gonna get
I'm
a
looking
chance
for
to.
the bail reform comment
I'm
now,
not gonna get
but
a chance to discuss everything that I wanted to discuss. So I'm
yeah.
gonna mess with Keisha one on one. I'm gonna work on her tonight and tomorrow to see if she willing to come back and do it Thursday or maybe Saturday night or sometime next week.
Oh
But
yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
so it's funny when he said that because King knew just what I was going to say. King knew that black people in particular, particularly black youth, seeing King, a man who preached peace, a pastor, someone of the cloth, a clergyman, seeing what happened to him, he knew that the message that he was communicating to onlookers was not to love your enemy and to love the quote unquote white man, but he knew that by them seeing that, they were becoming more embittered, were becoming angrier, because they wanted to take revenge against the system that had done such a thing to a man who did nothing but preach peace. He knew he was radicalizing them
Oh
by
man, Chuck, you are
by
spot.
sacrificing himself, because any man with dignity, and I'm gonna tell you, would have had that effect on me, particularly if I were young. Any man with dignity is not going to say to himself, I am not going to sit up there and let them beat me and do that to me. Ain't no way. I respect it. And as I know, it takes a lot of courage and strength sometimes not to strike back. But man, it's time for us to fight back, because you're not going to do that to me. He knew that's the effect that he was having on them. And that's why he did it. That's why he did it. And he used the fact that he was radicalizing the youth as a weapon, as a blackmail tool, so that he can get what he wanted. He said that, of course, riots was the language of the unheard. He then went on to remark about the Kerner Commission report, which was a study conducted by the Johnson administration. Because remember, the Watts riots, which at the time before the Detroit riots of '67, was the most deadly riot we had ever seen in this country. The Watts riots occurred just 2 or 3 days after the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and we had a riot exploding in California. Wait a minute, we just had major civil rights legislation passed just a few days ago, and all of a sudden you're rioting in Watts? Okay. So shortly before King's death in 1967, Lyndon B. Johnson put together a commission to study riots, to figure out why all of a sudden we're having all these explosions and racial tension and riots in the country. The Kerner Commission report came to the realization that it was because of systemic injustice and racism and police brutality and inequality. All the left-wing agenda items that you hear bandied about today, this is what the Lyndon B. Johnson administration discovered, even though the Lyndon B. Johnson administration was given direct proof and evidence that it was clandestine communist forces that was behind the upheaval. They still refused to publish those aspects of the administration's findings. And Dr. King remarked in response to the findings of the commission report that he likened it to a quote unquote physician's warning. This is what King said, that the riots were a physician's warning. In other words, the country is sick, the people are lashing out because society is unjust. I know what justice is. I know what the people need. I know what the people want. And if you don't do what I say, then them folk gonna get you. He used that to great effect, and he used it to his advantage so that he can gain a foothold in the federal government so that he could push socialist legislation.
Man, that is so true. And the Bible does say that we should not riot. The Bible explicitly says, do not riot. So again, con man. All right. Let's see. What did I wanted to
and Keith, I'm not gonna get into a long thing, but you know what Justin just said is wrong, because if King is the movement, this man has a giant 20-foot statue in DC. If he taught us how to love our enemies and love the people who were hurting us, which were the white racists, I suppose, then how in the world can you explain the fact that on the end, at the tail end of the civil rights movement, which was marked by he and Bobby King's assassination in '68, how do you explain the rise in popularity of Black militancy and Black nationalism, and the rise in popularity of Stokely Carmichael, Eldridge Cleaver, and Huey P. Newton, and Bobby Seale, and so on and so forth, Angela Davis? How come more overt radicalism is what succeeded behind them, is what came after the civil rights movement? It's not true, Justin. It's not true what you're saying. It's true what I said. It's true what I said. This is why the riots exploded right after his assassination.
Man. And it started before he died. He was killed.
Exactly.
Because in 66, again, the article that goes out in the New York Times, July 31st, 1966, where the National Committee of Negro Congressmen, they explicitly say, we're abandoning the whole nonviolent Martin Luther King style of activism, and we're embracing the Black Power movement. So they literally tell the whole world in the New York Times, they were not shy about it,
nope.
That they were coming into agreement with the Black Power militant movement. So
exactly. Diane, they were turning on him. They were starting to turn on King. They were turning on him too.
Oh man, I'm reading Cone. Oh my gosh, y'all. Let me stay focused. Because what you said it's exactly what James Cone wrote. Anyway, we'll talk about that tomorrow. Diane, thank you for the $10 super chat. Good to see you. I want to encourage Christians on here to study the Scottish covenants, the original MAGA, and Puritans like Samuel Rutherford. Great show, Mrs. Benton. Hope to hear from you soon, Chuck. Thank you so much, Diane. I've never heard of those things, but you know, we are definitely researchers over here. We'll check it out. All right, here we go. Golly, time flew by. That's not fair.
Okay. Should be the number one factor in that. So those are some of the things that I look at in that regard when I'm talking about systems that need to be changed.
So would you say, like, for instance, if someone, let's say someone gets in trouble and they have money to afford a better attorney, as opposed to someone who gets the same crime, but they don't have money to afford like a better attorney to help them navigate that system, that situation. How do you legally, deal with that? You can't like go, how do
Let me
you
give you a
deal with
better
that? You
example.
go
Yeah.
into
Let
other
me give you
people's.
an example more of what I was talking about.
Okay, cool.
I would take like the bail system. Somebody could steal $1 million, and because they have money, get out tomorrow. Somebody could steal $2,000, and if they don't have money, they got to stay in there. To me, that's not fair. To me, that impacts poor people in a way, because you lose your job, all these other things happen. That impacts poor people in a way that it shouldn't. And so when I look at that system, I say, I want that to change, because just because you had more money to start with shouldn't mean that you spend less time when sometimes you did something that was worse. So that would be an example that I think carries what I was trying to say.
What's the issue if I were to say, well, if you don't have money to get yourself out of jail and those kind of things, like how about being more careful in your actions and not committing crimes? From my perspective, if you lessen the punishment. Okay, well, that's his quick statement on it. So, Chuck, what do you? I wish I could replay for you guys Chuck's text message to me about this.
Because you were trying to get an understanding, and y'all were going back and forth for a while, and you were just like, all right, I get it.
Yeah,
And then you just
I
kind of
didn't
moved on.
understand. So I think I had asked him to give me an example of like a current oppression that's happening now, or some injustice that's happening now, because he was saying like all this stuff is happening, and that was the first thing he threw out, bail reform. And I'm like, I don't know much about bail reform, so I didn't really know how to respond to that. But go ahead, Chuck. What do you got?
Right. It's just another left wing ideal sort of situation where, like you said, you asked him, and I don't think you played that here, but you asked him when you all first began to broach this topic, and you made a great point that we live in a free society, and in a free society, not everyone's going to be equal, and some people are going to have things that others do not, and one of those things includes money. And there is a difference in skills. There's a difference in skill sets between industries, within industries, right? You have certain individuals that are more talented than others, right? Because there are skill gradients within professions and vocations and occupations. And so you asked him, you said, well, what say you when it comes to a person who has more money and can afford to hire a more skillful lawyer? Don't they have a legal advantage in a courtroom if their lawyer is more competent? Which is a great question, and it is a question that cannot be answered unless you're going to try to find a way to socialize human capital. You're going to find a way to socialize skills and skill development. And artists do have a way of doing this because they have a keen way of reading apathy and immorality within a society, to the point where people do not go about the business of investing time in order to foster a high degree of skills in any given profession. And we as a collective suffer because no individual, very few individuals amongst us develop the source of knowledge that we need in order to bring certain goods and services to the market that we can utilize in order to increase our own living standards. And so the living standards as a result of everyone begins to go down. Okay, so there is no solution to that. You just have to allow human capital to develop, or you don't. Some lawyers are going to be better than others, and some people are going to make more money than other people. But instead of addressing that issue and saying that that is just a human imperfection that we're going to have to live with, he pivoted and said that, well, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about money being part of the bail process. And when you ask them, should individuals, well, should there be no bail? He said, well, no, I'm not suggesting that there shouldn't be any bail. I just don't want money to be a factor, because I don't want it to be based upon whether, how much money you have, or whether someone is poor, or whether someone is rich. But he isn't in favor of getting rid of bail entirely. But I guess he just wants to manage it in a way that's more equitable, or in a way that's more fair. But if an individual has a larger, I don't want to say a larger share of their asset portfolio consists of liquid cash, even if they have more cash on hand, the person who has more cash to spend, more cash at his disposal, is going to be harmed less by anything that has a price on it, no matter what it is, even if that is bail. Now, he made the point. He said that money shouldn't be a factor. In other words, people who don't, this is what the left says, which is why they promote catch and release. He said that people who have money get out quicker. That's not always true. Remember, most famously, Puffy languished in jail throughout the duration of his trial, and he wanted to bail out because it's part of your constitutional rights as a person who has not yet been convicted to be able to mount a legal defense. And sometimes, Keisha, having money undermines your ability to post bail, or sometimes bail is denied in instances where a person has more money because they are considered a higher flight risk, because they have the resources to, leave the country undetected. People who are poor, oftentimes, they are allowed to, leave jail under certain conditions because judges realize that they don't have the resources to leave even if they wanted to. And yes, sometimes, of course, it has a lot to do with arrest record. It has a lot to do with your criminal
That's
record,
what
and
he
so on
was
and so
saying. We
forth.
should go by. We should go by your past, your
But
things, and basically
here's the
other
thing.
things, but everything but money.
And here's the thing. They do. So if they do that already. Now, either you're going to have money attached to or you're not. A lot of times people get, because I've been through the legal system. I don't call a case before. I don't went through the process. I know how it works. When I called, I know we got to go now. When I called my case, Keisha, they told me, and I didn't even have a job. I was on the street petty hustling. They told me that I made too much money to have a public defender, that I had to retain my own lawyer. I had to come out $1,000, thousands of dollars of my own money to retain my own lawyer, and I didn't even have a job. Oftentimes, depending upon the county that you're in, a lot of the taxpayer resources are spent. So in order to cut down on costs, they start to raise the bar so as to make government services inaccessible to anybody who simply claims that they need it because they just don't have it to give. And not to mention the fact that these public defenders have an immense caseload, particularly in places where there's a high amount of crime. So whatever, I've been through the process. Again, I know how it works. They already take into account your criminal past. They do that already. And so if you're telling me that you don't want that, because again, he did not agree that there shouldn't be a price. I guess he just said that it shouldn't be a part of it. So does that mean you want everyone released on personal recognizance? That's called a PR bond. For those of you who've never been through the legal process, that simply means that you agree that you will return at a specified date, right? And if you don't, then a bench warrant is issued for your arrest, so on and so forth, okay? So anytime you put a, no matter how much you lower the price, there's always going to be someone claiming that they can't afford it. I don't care what it is. So you either attach a price to the bail system or you don't. But here's where it comes full circle, Keisha, all the way back to what you suggested in the beginning about competency when it comes to legal representation. What are you going to do about that? Because when you go before a judge, Keisha, guess what happens? You're arraigned and you have what's called a bail hearing. As an attorney, he knows that. Judges decide the conditions on your bail, once they hear oral arguments from the state and from the legal defense. So if you have, in principle, a better lawyer, don't you think a more skilled and competent lawyer arguing on your behalf can broker better bail conditions for you? Of course they can. So you will come all the way full circle. Judges don't just sit there, and it depends on the severity of the crime and so on and so forth. But the conditions of one's bail is determined at the conclusion of a bail hearing where the judge hears from the state's prosecutor as to why bail should be high, and then they listen to arguments from your lawyer as to why your bail should be lowered. Perhaps your bail was too high because you didn't have a lawyer that could adequately argue for your release. As a lawyer, he should know that. But instead, he wants to have
I guess
whatever.
his prescription, I guess, would be that basically you shouldn't be able to have, but it's not, so it's the state and your attorney though. It's not like it's too paid for. It's not like, it's you, the private citizen, against another private citizen. It's you and this against the state.
It's you against the state, yeah, because you
so it's not
against the law.
You need a competent lawyer that could defend against this government. Like,
right.
So why? The bottom, I didn't even think about that then. But
the bottom line is, the legal process is so intricate, and you have so many factors intersecting at one situation that there is no way to uniformly try and fix this problem that doesn't even exist just because a bunch of criminals don't want to remain in jail while they go through the legal process. That's all this amounts to. He knows that. He knows better. But this is why I said that Justin, whether he knows it or not, he is a progressive. And he even complimented Donald Trump for getting involved in this process.
Criminal.
And I'm saying, so, well, what role does the President of the United States, as Chief Executive and Commander of our armed forces, what role does he have in the criminal proceedings all across the country, state to state, district to district? That is something that warrants a political and legal discussion. But he wants the president to do something about it. Well, when you commit a crime, you don't commit crimes against the federal government. In every instance, you commit crimes against the state. And so the president's power is limited in this respect, but he wants the president to get involved because he, like members of the civil rights movement, wanted to solve problems at the point of the federal government so that they could change societies wholesale and faster, which is the progressive agenda, because progressivism, and said another way, progressivism is a form of social Darwinism. And these are the words of Woodrow Wilson. I had a speech from Woodrow Wilson. Keyed up called "What is Progress?" And I was going to read to it to give people an understanding of what progressivism actually is, but we're out of time, and maybe I'll cover Woodrow Wilson's speech next time. But,
yes.
Yeah. Bail reform. This another issue. It's not an issue.
I was actually very surprised that that's where the conversation ended up going, because we're talking about like oppression and this, and we're like, he's like, I'm gonna give me an example. He's like, bail reform. I'm like, I wanted to say bail reform, but okay.
What that does is it just changes the process and the procedure. Which will end up not making things more equitable, equal, and fair for people charged with crimes. The only thing it's going to do is put more criminals out on the street. That's the only thing it's going to do, and that's why leftists support it. They want to put more criminals back on the street because they identify with the criminals, the oppressed and the downtrodden, and blah, 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 blah. We've heard it all before. All it does is put more criminals out on the street.
I want to read some comments. Love Christ says, we can stop with all the theory and go to data. Blacks get worse sentences than whites for the same crime. This is a congressional study. The first thing I will say, and then I'll let Chuck address it. When you lump, statistics are very tricky, Love Christ. When you read something like that, you got to understand categories. So you can't just say blacks get worse sentences than whites, because you have to know, you have to measure apples and apples. So are we talking first degree? You can't even just say murder, because in different states, that means it's not just murder. It could be first degree, second degree, third degree, and so or some places even they don't even use those types of categories. So you got to be careful when you're looking at statistics to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. You got to look at what was the background, because that is something that statistics cannot tell you. And they many times in these types of studies, they don't include what was the background of both of the criminals that you're comparing. Background meaning, have they ever been in trouble before? Make sure it's the same level crime. And it needs to be really in the same state, because there could be different laws for different same types of crimes, so to speak, but in one state the punishment is different, in another state it's not. They don't give you all that information typically in these studies. They give you these blanket studies to fit a narrative. That's what I got to say on that. Chuck, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, like I said earlier in the conversation, what these people do, because they're lazy, they don't think, they never did a scientific study of their own, don't know how scientific studies are conducted or how to analyze and interpret them. And so what they do is they take these popular talking points that, as you mentioned, Keisha, do not control or do not consider controlling for other variables. Oftentimes, the people who conduct these studies have controlled for other variables, but people like to truncate or extrapolate, should I say, certain aspects of a study in order to weave a narrative. And so what they look at simply as they look at outcome-based statistics and for asymmetry. In other words, they look for racial disparities in outcomes as proof of discrimination. And so what that has done is effectively taken our entire history and legacy of jurisprudence on Western civilization or throughout the history of Western law and philosophy, and they've turned it upside down, and they placed the burden at the feet of the accused as opposed to the accuser. You're looking at statistical disparities. But what she is not taught, what she didn't mention, is the fact that, like you said, you have to, one of the key factors that people don't look at who say the types of things that person in the comment section says is that Blacks on average have much longer arrest records. So when you are sentenced for a crime, not only is your prior convictions read into the record, as they say. Like I said, bro, people in the comment section calling me names. Somebody in the comment section called me a nerd, bro. If you ever saw me in real life, I'll show you a nerd. I ain't nobody's nerd. Been through the process. I know exactly what goes on. I've been through it.
Nerds are good. Nerds are good. So, I'd rather my daughter be with a nerd than some hood booger. Okay.
Oh yeah, I'm just saying, speaking from knowledge and speaking from wisdom. When your sentence is read into or certain things are read into the record, as they say in court, not only do they take into account your prior convictions, but they take into account your prior arrest record, because every time you interface with police and are placed in cuffs, Mirandized, and placed in the back of a squad car, a record is taken of it, even if no charges are ever filed, let alone if you were convicted. Blacks on average have much longer arrest records because they get arrested. But I know, Black people have been criminalized more in this and the third. It's all nonsense. Okay. Everybody knows Blacks commit more crime and commit more heinous crimes.
It's not
up for debate.
That's the truth. Okay. Chuck, how can you state, quote, you have no proof of this, and proceed to put forth the narrative that many Black church bombings were done by the Communist Party? Please have proof when making such a statement. So I just want to say first that Chuck did not say, he said he was speculating because he didn't have proof, but he said, and I'm answering for you when you're right here, but just so everybody knows, what he was saying is, because I've heard you talk about this on other things in other places, there's a lot of evidence that the communists or that these things were set up. There is evidence. We just didn't go into it, but there was no convictions. There was no hard evidence, but there was circumstantial evidence that these things were happening, because there was actual proof of other instances that the Blacks and the right communists were working together, or blacks in the KKK who were both in the Communist Party. So I just wanted to give that little nugget there. Did you have anything else for her?
I mean, it's the strangest thing, you would think, you preface a comment, for the sake of honesty, clarity, and accuracy, that you're speculating, and yet still you're not even allowed to speculate, even when you clearly see that you're only speculating. Don't try to regulate and tell me what I can say and what I can't say. Is conspiratorially minded as some of y'all folks is. Give me a break. And I gave you an example of such a thing occurring in the case of a communist by the name of Miles Horton. I'm not going to go into the whole background of Miles Horton, but you can look into it. But we know of this. We also have the first-hand testimonies of communist defectors like Manning Johnson and Whitaker Chambers and so on and so forth, and Elizabeth Bentley and Benjamin Gitlow and so many other communists who testified publicly, who have written books and have said that as members of the Communist Party, they were involved in such things firsthand. And so we know these things happen. We know these things have taken place because it is part of the Hegelian playbook. If you know anything about the philosophy of Hegel, like I said, Marx, these various utopian ideologies, again, they proceed Marx. I can give an entire conversation and talk about the totalitarian ideologies that helped shape Karl Marx's worldview, but nevertheless, for whatever reason, Karl Marx became the standard bearer and the poster child for totalitarianism in the 20th century, along with the supplemental strategy prescriptions that were put forth by Vladimir Lenin. The communists, that sort of like became their, Marx and Lenin sort of became their North Star. And Marx, Engels, and Lenin explicitly stated that the toiling classes must be set against the bourgeoisie. The revolution was necessary in order to bring us to the next phase of to bring us to the next human epoch, which was the era of socialism. And so, therefore, tension between the warring classes had to be exacerbated. Tension must be deliberately caused in order to spark a revolution that will bring us toward the end of history. And so this is why I speculate for the genius that made that comment, is because they put their playbook out in the open for you to go and read. If you ever bothered to study anything, maybe you would know. But Lenin and Marx made this clear, that the different sides have to be made to war and to conflict, even if they don't know. And again, Keisha, it's so interesting because again, America was such a unique a place that you didn't have the kind of friction and tension between various quote unquote social classes, and so they had to find a way to create tension in order to bring forth the revolution in the United States, because for whatever reason, Americans just weren't buying it. And so this is why I say I believe that the communists were doing some of these things to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, Dr. King did it to himself out in the open. He knew he was going to get beat and abused. That's why he did it.
Mm-hmm. We're not I feel bad for the people in the comments who think like, Chuck is just making stuff up and he's just saying these things because he hates himself and he just loves white people. He loves Trump. And this stuff is well documented. That you think that the communists and the Marxists, they didn't leave a trail of their own thoughts behind. They have. They wrote this stuff down. They documented it. If you go look, there's a plethora of information. Chad O. Jackson, which Chuck has been a part of his documentary, the MLK Project, he literally reads from their own books. He shows you the footage, the original footage. He's done incredible work showing you the actual documents, the actual footage of a lot of these things, and reading from their own papers, their own essays, and their own books. This stuff is, we're not just like, you know what, I think I just want to, call people communists today. No. We looked around, we're like, something's wrong. We looked out at life, we saw something is wrong. And instead of just listening to the common narrative, we started digging around and we found answers. That's kind of how it goes when you actually start to research things. But y'all don't know anything about that. Like, it's like some of this stuff, like, it's just like some of you, this conversation is just way over your head, and we can tell by the comments. Okay. All right. Yeah. But I do want to say thank you to Megan, who's back. Megan, you here? You're listening to us while you're on the nice beaches of Hawaii. Thanks, girl. Katie, nice. Thank you. Love Christ. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Even though you disagree, I appreciate it. Pamela Callahan. Appreciate you being here, friend. Black Guy 9, Paul, DT, Karen. I love you guys so much. Let's see. Yes, please consider becoming a member of the channel.
Keisha, how many racial hoaxes have we seen over the last 10 years alone?
It's like, if America is just so racist, where they at though? Like, why do they have to go and make up racism? They have to go and make it up. Black people are going around. Oh, forget the SPLC caught red-handed making up race hoaxes. That should make you mad. All of you who are in the comments talking about just America's so racist, and look, you didn't get mad when people played you to the left. Well, no pun intended. You didn't get mad when they were literally making up race hoaxes. Did you go to their comments and give them the same smoke? You probably didn't. You probably didn't even know about it because your nose is so up with CNN. I'm just gonna leave it.
Yeah, and like I said, Keisha, they've been doing this for decades. Organizations like the SPLC, the ACLU, they've been communist fronts, especially the ACLU, started by two communist sympathizers named Harry Ward and Roger Baldwin. But, again, these people who are in the comments, they don't even know who Harry Ward and Roger Baldwin are. This is what the ACLU and the SPLC have been doing for decades. And like you just said, Keisha, they just got busted red-handed doing it, concocting these racial events in order to empower themselves and to spur the government action that would lead to more undermining of our liberties in the name of fairness and equality and
you're breaking up real bad, Chuck, and you're like, yeah. We're gonna go ahead and end it before I get in trouble because it's almost time goes by so fast. Thank you guys so much for watching. We will be back on yes. Thanks, Chuck.
Part 2, let's do it. I want to more. There's more in this interview I want to talk about, Keisha.
Yes, I do too. Let's look at maybe. I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you on that. All right, Chuck. Thank you. All right. Listen, you guys. We'll be back Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You guys, please tune in. Go back and like this video, hype this video, hype me up. And if you haven't hyped other videos, please go and hype those too. But we will be back tomorrow, Wednesday and Friday, to our regularly scheduled show, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope and pray that I will see you guys there. Be blessed. I will see you later. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.